Mr. Brad Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Pinal County Attorney Brad Miller. Here we are again.
Yes.
So let's give a little context here that about a year or so ago when you were on the campaign trail, I reached out to you. I had you on the podcast as a guest as candidate Brad Miller, mm-hmm. and you ran in the 2024 election for Pinal County Attorney, and here you are, Pinal County Attorney.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for all the people that voted for me. Thank you for all the people that entrusted me with this office, because that's how I look at it. It's only my office temporarily, so I'm really happy to be here.
That's very, very cool. I want to ask you a question about how was the transition from, this is your first time holding public office, correct?
Correct.
How is the transition from what you thought it would be to where you are now in the office? And you're about 100 days in or so?
Yeah, about 110.
Okay.
Yep. It's been difficult, to be honest. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of things that need to be done. I think the issue that I'm dealing with is just dealing with the county government and making sure to follow processes, all the different committees I'm a part of that I didn't know about. It's all of those background things that you don't realize.
Okay.
And I realized very quickly my time is not my own.
Gotcha.
And so I'm bouncing from place to place, which has been fantastic, going out and meeting members of the community. But you realize the importance of getting out to the community members to make sure that they know who you are and what the office does.
I wanted to talk about that. We had a little conversation beforehand, is that there has been this ginormous glow up of social media across the government spectrum, whether it's local sheriffs, local attorneys' offices, to federal agencies, to city agencies and county and everything in between. And I've seen a lot of your stuff. I've seen your face a lot more. I mean, one, I follow you as well. And every time your name pops up, or Pinal County Attorney, I have a vested interest, obviously.
Yep.
But there has been a mass flow of information, which is good to see, especially for the public to see.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing. I believe a lot of it has to do with the 2016 election. Mm-hmm. And, Trump was outspent probably 5 or 10 to 1. And he needed to figure out a way to get to the people and become really the people's president. And one of the ways that he did that was through social media. We saw that in the 2020 election, 2022, and in 2024 even more so, is that the changes in the times reflect what people want from their elected officials. And now people want access to
Absolutely.
them, to be able to reach out to them, to be able to see them, to have them have that conversation with them, or at least feel you're having a conversation with them. So I think it's a very positive thing. We're seeing a lot more people engaged in government. We're seeing people, certain people are upset,
right?
But certain people are happy, but at least they're engaged. And that's what we need to have a healthy republic, is we need to have two sides.
I agree 100% with that. And I actually think that government's supposed to actually be have a little bit more friction than people realize. Congress, the executive branch, and the legislative branch are actually not supposed to get along.
Correct.
They're supposed to be checks and balances, and it's supposed to be kind of a hostile environment.
Yeah, and I think that's the way it was designed. That's the way we had from the very beginning. I mean, we all know the history of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. They hated each other.
Sure.
They didn't get along. And it goes back to philosophy. I think we spoke a little bit about this before. Is what do you believe the philosophy of our government is? How it should interact with the people, what it should be doing, what are the basics that it should be doing and executing. And that's where we see the differences. I don't think that's ever going to change.
The older I've gotten, the more involved in politics I've gotten, not just through this podcast, but the fact remains is that of, for, and by the people.
Yep.
That's what government is supposed to be.
Yep.
That is how it's supposed to be. We are supposed to have access. The politicians are supposed to work for us. Mm-hmm. And that open transparency and simply stating, hey, this is what we're doing.
Yep.
That's a good thing. So I seriously commend you guys for that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's what the people demand. But here's a really neat movement is we saw, in Pinal County, we have a very older electorate. Mm-hmm. But the neat thing is now, because of what Trump has done, you talk about social media, that we're interacting with the people, we're getting down and messaging to the people so that people can message back to the elected officials. We're seeing younger and younger generations getting involved in politics. That's something that really hasn't happened before. Here's what we'll be telling, because I think we saw some of this after the 2018 election and through Barack Obama's presidential years, but will it last? And that's going to be the question, because typically you see very little involvement, and then as people get older, they get much more involved in government. But we saw this big bubble in the 2024 election. The question is, will these people stick around and will they continue to participate? I don't know.
I'm a PC in the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I've always found difficult and interesting is that on the Democrat side, and I don't want to be like too much Democrat and Republican right now, just different philosophies. But the thing that I've always noticed from a conservative standpoint is it's actually kind of difficult to be young and conservative because you want to go out and party and do all the fun and wild things. Don't get me wrong. There's conservative young people. That's not what I'm saying. But they have that hook in younger people with the promises of free this and free that, and that's just the mentality. I'm painting with a very broad brush right now over the young persons that are involved in politics. So it's always been in the Republican Party. It's always been difficult for me to how do we reach the younger generation, have sticking power with them, and be like, it's a commitment and it's a choice and it's I believe in the conservative lifestyle with some progressive leanings, a little bit to the left, but that's just reaching the youth has been a huge challenge for the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think historically, but we're seeing a complete change of that. Again, 2022 and 2024, I think have flipped the entire script. Look at who voted for Trump. Look at who voted for the Republican Party here in Arizona in 2022. All of that, I think, has changed.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's changed is because the Republican Party now espouses the ideals of those underdogs.
Yeah.
It's a blue-collar party. We're accepting union members. We're accepting young people who want more freedom. And I think the philosophies have changed. The Republican Party is not the party of big government and big business anymore.
Agreed.
They want people to afford homes. They want people to live freely. They want people to have the ability to raise a family if they want to, and not raise a family if they want to.
Right.
I think that's where the issues have changed. And I think if the Republican Party continues to push in that direction and message in that direction, they will continue to be successful. But here's the issue. Will they stay on message during the next cycle? I'm not sure.
There's offense and defense on both sides, and it just depends on how they're going to, play defense with what's coming up. And I don't want to dive too much into the federal politics because that's not what we're here about, but it just, obviously that guides the ship that we're all in. And we'll just have to see how that plays out. Yeah,
but it really does have a gigantic effect. You talk about the messaging to the people. Yes, social media is becoming bigger, but we still see a lot of people tuning into network media.
Sure.
And so I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think it's changing forms. You're starting to see a lot of those personalities have podcasts, going out and doing on the street interviews, getting out more. So I think that is here to stay for sure.
I think that the power of the local podcast and the power of podcasting in general has just, that's how I get all of my news now. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't even watch. The only thing I'll have CNN or Fox or whatever on for is like a national emergency.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, something big happened. Okay. But as far as like actually what's going on in the world, I listen to all small. They're not even small now. Now they've got like 1 million followers, but they're days ahead of what is on the news because they don't have an agenda.
I think it's that, and it's longer form podcasts.
Yes.
I think people like the 20-second clip. I think you get a lot of clickbait for those, but what they want is to hear analysis. Why do people think the way they do? Who are they?
Yep.
And to me, I think a longer form podcast like this has the ability to tell a better story. And I think people connect with stories more than they connect with sound bites.
Very much agreed. And also the fact remains is that it's not, people are waking up to the fact that networks are just clipping it down to the most insane things that are being said. And then people just, obviously the clickbait to get people there, but they're tired of the rhetoric. They're tired of the BS. They're tired of that. They want to hear the conversation. They want to hear what's on your mind, who makes you who you are, and what makes you tick.
And I think here's the main reason why that it's so effective is because when you have a longer form podcast and people listen in, they feel like they're part of that conversation.
Yes.
Whereas if you have a clipped up interview, it's being dictated to you. And I think those days are over. The distrust in the media generally of how they edit videos, how they edit audio is not going to fly anymore. People always ask, give us the full clip and we'll do the analysis ourselves.
And it's also brought to you by Pfizer.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's no agenda.
Yep.
Whoever it sponsors on YouTube, that's who it's brought to you by. But yeah, there's no push. There's no agenda. Yep. There's no, okay, you got 20 seconds. Go ahead and break down the most complex thing you've ever talked about on news media in 20 seconds.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Well, like we said earlier, that it's you can get up in front of a crowd of 10,000 people and speak, but then to do that little clip in one take, it's like your brain just fries.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to get a complex issue. Like for instance, in a couple of weeks, or I think in a week or so, we have Cinco de Mayo. To break down, we are doing shooting a video this morning on Cinco de Mayo.
Okay.
I can't break down Cinco de Mayo in a 20-second clip.
No.
You know why? Because it's complicated and it's important to our own American Republic. I don't think people realize the history behind Cinco de Mayo and how important it was to our own Civil War efforts.
No.
And so
I can't. Today where you drink and that's about it.
No, it is not. It's extremely important. And as you know, I'm in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, after 1865, went down and assisted the Mexicans in order to rescue their country and get the republic back from the French.
News to me. I just knew Cinco de Mayo as the day where you made little festive things and hit a piñata, and that's about it.
I mean, I could give you just a brief history on that if you want.
Sure,
I know
go for
we
it.
want to talk about other things.
I want to talk about you and your office. Absolutely.
Sure. But I think, again, it's extremely important. Obviously, on May 5th, 1862 was the Battle of Pueblo. And so the Mexican people were trying to stave off the French. And I think this is very applicable even to us today. The French were essential, because of Napoleon's wars, were calling in loans from the Mexican people and said, you need to pay these now. They didn't have the money to do it. So because they couldn't pay, they decided, then we're just going to take over your country. And the Mexican people obviously were very offended by that. They couldn't pay.
Sure.
They couldn't pay their bills, and they knew they didn't want to give away their country. So the French said, "We're going to come take it." And so as they were marching to Mexico City, Pueblo was in the way. The Mexican people, with very, very little training, very few weapons, stopped them temporarily. And this was in 1861, 1862 timeframe. The American people saw that, and we were going through our own issues, obviously in our own Civil War. Mm-hmm. And because the Mexican people fought so valiantly during that time, it actually staved off the French from landing more troops into New Orleans. We were able to, to stop the Confederates from them resupplying the Confederates. And the Union Army was able to take over, win obviously in 1865. And then because of that, after 1865, we saw that the plight of the people. By that time, the French had taken over Mexico City. And the American people said, no, we need a republic in this area. And they decided to go fight and assist the Mexicans to reclaim their republic. It's an extremely important holiday.
That's enlightening to me. That's news to me. And that's very interesting.
Yep.
None of that's taught anywhere. none of that's taught anywhere.
But in a podcast, you can talk about it.
Absolutely.
But
it's taught as Mexican Independence Day, which is
it's
wrong.
Not.
Right?
No. It's definitely not. But it actually did lead to, I believe, Mexican Independence Day. Because it was the first time that the people said, no, we're going to stop Napoleon and his wars. And to think about taking on a power of Napoleon in that time, he basically ruled the whole world. He believed he was the new Charlemagne. And so they took on those people. Yes, they did lose, but they stopped them and eventually regained the republic because of it. Very, very valiant people.
That's interesting. That's a very cool story.
Yep.
Thank you for the history lesson.
Absolutely.
So you said a couple things though. You said that you are still a Marine.
I am.
Well, first and foremost, once a Marine, always a Marine.
Absolutely.
So let's get that straight.
Yep.
But you're still in. You're
in.
still doing your thing.
Yep. 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. I drill. I just finished up with 4th Marine Division, which is our infantry unit for our entire reserves. And now I'm moving over to what's called 4th CAG, Civil Affairs Group.
Okay.
Which is based out of Miami.
And you're the elected county attorney. So let's talk about that and the office and what has happened since you've been in and your vision and what's most important to you. I know that's like a million things right there, but.
Yeah, we could talk about this for a long time. I think the number one thing I wanted to do coming in here was change how we prosecute cases. And this is one of the issues that I ran on. You know, I think I don't know if I told you this before, but I was a victim of a DUI. Somebody ran their vehicle right into me. I think they blew a .2, which is over 2 times the legal limit. So I'm a victim of a DUI offense. So I was personally offended by how we were prosecuting even DUI offenses in Pinal County.
Okay.
And so that's the issue that I ran on. Secondly, I've prosecuted crimes against children for a number of years. And so one of the main things that I wanted to start was a crimes against child unit. And that's exactly what we've done in my first 100 days. We actually stood up a special victims unit, which prosecutes crimes against children, prosecutes domestic violence cases. And I think people who commit crimes against children need to pay. and they need to go to prison. And so that was one of the focuses of my office.
I have seen from your press releases and all that. You guys have obviously focused on that. I've seen you down at the Capitol speaking. I don't specifically remember the bills, but I know that there has been some bills in the Arizona legislature this year in regards to harsher, stiffer penalties for those that offend kids, offend against children. And I will tell you this right now, that like, I believe that 99% of the population is redeemable. I believe that those are not.
Yeah.
I'm okay with those who harm children to be put away for forever.
Well, and that was one of the issues that we had with the way Arizona law was written. So again, one of my priorities was to prosecute and to convict people who commit crimes against children. And so we actually run these sting operations. I don't know if you've ever seen the To Catch a Predator, Chris Hansen type of show.
Sure.
It was very popular for a while. And so we've done a number of those here in the local valley, including in Apache Junction. What we found out is that...
Were you part of the big one that just was all over the news?
Yes.
Gotcha. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's
but
okay.
I remember seeing that all over the place.
Yeah. So what we found out, though, under Arizona law, if a police officer poses as a child in order to have one of those sex trafficking stings, that does not fall under 13705, which is a dangerous crime against children.
Okay.
Therefore, they're potentially probation eligible. So think about this. If a person is trying to meet a child who's 13 or 14 years old for sex, they aren't prison mandatory. And I was surprised about that.
Because of the wording of the law, because it's an adult pretending to be a child?
So it was actually the wording of a court.
Okay.
And that's the interesting part. We can talk about courts a little bit later, but the Division II of the Arizona Court of Appeals put out an opinion and essentially said, if the Arizona legislature wanted us to put this as a dangerous crime against children, they would have said so. I mean, so we have to accept the law. I accept judicial rulings.
Sure.
I respect the court. And so what I advocated for was a very simple fix, basically a one-sentence fix, which essentially tells the courts, yes, this is what we mean, and it should be a dangerous crime against children. And luckily, the governor signed that into law about a week and a half ago.
So before you were eligible for probation, now if you're an adult pretending to be a juvenile.
So if you have a police officer who's posing to be a child and a person participates and tries to meet up with that, fake child, that person is prison mandatory.
Awesome.
Yep.
Good.
It's a prison mandatory offense.
As I've gotten older and my thoughts on criminal justice and criminal justice reform have changed a little bit. I don't necessarily believe certainly in mandatory minimums, but I do believe in mandatory minimums for, again, if that person is proven guilty, I believe in the rule of law in regards to innocent until proven guilty. I very much believe in due process, but yeah, we can go, even speaking it. Yeah, we're good.
Well, I think there's some crimes that deserve a mandatory presumptive sentence. And crimes against children certainly are some of those. Sexual assault, certainly some of those. Some of our domestic violence or strangulation offenses should qualify for those. And so, when we see a problem with the law that we can't prosecute cases appropriately, I think we need to change the law.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what we did.
Do you see your role as a county attorney to be helping change laws?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. We've been asked down at the legislature quite a bit because, these are difficult topics. How a person reads a case. I've dealt with this a lot, even in my various public speaking. A person will quote me a law, and they'll think it means something. When I read it, I think it means something different.
Sure.
And so this goes back to philosophy and tradition. You have to read the law within the tradition of the law in order to understand what it's talking about, even the definitions. There are some things you have to understand the common law. You have to have some sort of background before you read it to understand what it's actually meaning. And so I think if you read it out of context, you're going to miss it.
Well, and that's the entire, I don't want to use the word problem, but that's the crux of our entire criminal justice system. It's all opinion.
Yeah.
A Supreme Court opinion is, given. That's exactly what it is. Well, how that person interprets it is different than this person.
Well, and that's where the frustration can be, is that it shouldn't be based upon opinion. And I think that this goes back to philosophy. You have a person like Justice Alito who wants to look at a constitutional view. How should this be read? Historical tradition. What do the actual words mean? Let's actually read the words and interpret it based upon what the words are. And then you have the other side saying, well, this isn't the outcome that I'm looking for. I need to change the rules in order to come up with the outcome. You know, it's something that I personally disagree with. I think we should read the Constitution, the laws, how they're being written. And the interpretation, the presumption of that interpretation should be that the lawmaker knows what they're talking about, and we should interpret it on that basis.
You're making the assumption, though, that they've actually studied up on what it is they're making a law about.
You know what's interesting? I think there's some, again, I'm not speaking federally, I'm just talking about in the state. I had an opportunity to go down and speak at the legislature, I don't know, a lot this particular past cycle. I've met with a lot of the legislatures, both Republican and Democrat. These people really do care. They break down the words.
Agreed.
They try their best. We've had lively debates. I won't say who it was, which is good. We want to debate with these folks and say, no, that's not what it means. That's or if you do this, here's the effect you're going to have on these other laws. You know, you have this very narrow view of what you're looking at.
Yes.
But there is a wider context of if you change this law, then it's going to change all of these too.
I because of the circles that I run in, I have lively debates with both the left and the right.
Yep.
And you're 100% correct that there is a thought that lawmakers are dumb and all that type of stuff. No, they're not. Do some of them make mistakes? Absolutely. But every interaction with every single Arizona legislator I've met, even a couple of rookies that I've had the fortune of getting to know, have been thoughtful and listened. What they did with that information afterwards, I don't know.
Yep.
But in the moment, they were taking notes. They were listening. How can I help? What is the problem on both the D and the R side?
Correct.
So there is a common. I do believe that people that, such as yourself, that get into politics, there is an underlying foundation of I want to help. I want to fix the problem.
That's exactly right.
And sometimes they go astray after that, but there's that foundation.
Or there's other issues that we don't see. But the important piece is that a lot of these legislatures ask for me to come into their office and get advice. If I change this word or this law, what will happen?
That's good.
And so that I appreciate is them saying, I don't understand this process, or I don't understand this rule, or I don't understand why this word is there. To me, it goes back to the very famous adage by G.K. Chesterton, never remove a fence until you know why it was put there in the first place. And I think the same thing with Arizona law.
Amen.
Is why do we put it there? What is it supposed to be? And is there a reason why it's there? Is it staving off these other things?
Yeah, was it a mistake? Was it just a clerical error?
Correct.
Was it may and should have been shall?
Correct.
Okay, that's an issue. But yeah, that's a good quote.
Yep.
So how has your philosophy moving into the Pinal County Attorney's Office, how has that changed what the law is going after? Because there's obviously former law enforcement. Yep. There's two sides of it. You can't do your job until law enforcement does their job.
Correct.
How has that philosophy changed across since you've stepped into your role?
Well, to me, it goes back to relationship building. I have a really good relationship with our new sheriff, Ross Teeple, and we've had lots of discussions about how to handle particular issues, how we can integrate with their office, issues with training, how we can integrate with our training, and even how my own office looks at various issues. You know, there's a lot of my prosecutors, for instance, we took them out to the gun range the other day. There's a lot of my prosecutors that hadn't shot before. That's
interesting.
And it's like, well, we're prosecuting gun cases and we don't understand the basics of guns. To call a magazine a clip, simple things where any shooter, if you're actually prosecuting these cases, would know you don't know what you're talking about, is something that I think we can fix very easily. And so one of the things I focused on is an office where we are consistently training and are humble enough to say, I don't understand this fully. How do we get there? Who do we need to bring in? Where do we need to go? I'll send people out of state for training.
Awesome.
How do we get people up to speed so that we can bring in the best ideas and the best things from all over the country into Pinal County? That's my goal.
That's amazing. And that's something I never really thought about, is the fact that you kind of need to be trained on what it is you're prosecuting.
Correct.
Yep. Is there an investigative division to the Pinal County Attorney's Office?
There is.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a number of investigators internally.
Okay.
We have our own intel individual who was a former S2 in the Marine Corps, which is an intelligence officer. And he looks at all of our stats and our data. We want to be a very data stat-driven office. I'm hoping here in about a month or so, maybe a little bit longer, we're going to launch a statistical analysis of our county on our website.
Okay.
So people will be able to see where are the crimes happening and where are the things that we should be focusing on.
So let me ask you a question on that
Sure.
note. I mean, Pinal County is the second most populous county in the state of Arizona.
Third.
Third?
Yep. Behind Pima. Pima and Maricopa. Yeah.
Well, that's Tucson. We don't talk about Tucson. We don't.
I love my Tucson brethren.
No, because of my organization, I have to go down to Tucson a lot recently.
Okay, yeah.
I actually really, really started to like Tucson. Yeah.
It's so pretty.
It's very pretty, and
with
it's
the
like,
mountains.
Yes, and it's also like Phoenix 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, if we could just go back to that would be great. Yep. Oh shoot, I just lost my train of thought.
You're talking about philosophy.
Yeah. I had a specific question. In regards to Pinal County specific, Pinal County is a border county.
Yes.
Well, for lack of a better term, I feel as though it is.
We are, yeah.
And again, that's been debated a little bit here and there, but it is a border county. And I'm using old statistics, so stop me at any point in time. It was my understanding that 80% of all human smuggling, child trafficking, sex trafficking, and illicit narcotics were coming through Arizona as a whole.
Yeah.
Probably 80% of that, 80% of that is probably coming through Pinal County.
Yeah.
In regards to priorities, what is the biggest priority in Pinal County that you see?
So the biggest priority, as I talked before, was standing up that special victims unit to go after sex trafficking and human trafficking.
Is it mostly related to the border, or is it within county just...
Well, now that the president has closed the border, we're seeing, to me, it's just like any action has an equal and opposite reaction. We know if we close the border, something else is going to happen. Sure. Criminals are still going to criminal, and they're going to do their thing. And so it's interesting what we're seeing even today. I was a little bit surprised personally. We still have 2 to 3 high-speed chases on the I-10 a week still. Luckily
from human smugglers, child trafficking, probably drug smuggling as well.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
And it creates such a dangerous situation where a lot of counties, and I'm not going to point the specific ones out for their own purposes, but in Pinal County, we have a policy that we will track them down. That's one of the things I spoke to Sheriff Teeple about. And yes, they will pursue those individuals. And I think that's important, because in a lot of counties, they will not pursue them. So they know, the human traffickers know, if I drive 120, they won't get me and I'm going to get away. That does not happen in Pinal County anymore. We will go after you and we will prosecute you.
And not only that, but you're going to meet the back end of a pit maneuver and be all over the side of I-10.
Well, you can't pit at that speed, but there's other methodologies. Sure. Yeah.
I do watch. I'm not one of these people that watches cop videos all day long. Just when I'm doing my doom scrolling at night, I've seen some of those East Coast boys, the Georgia State Patrol and the Florida Highway Patrol. Pit maneuver at 130 miles an hour, and I'm like,
good luck.
No, thank you. I don't even think my old Crown Vic could have gotten it up to 132. But that's good to hear that the focus is on the most vulnerable.
Yeah, I think that's where we should have our focus.
Amen.
Our priority should be protection of human life, and because it goes back to our view of human life. Where does human life come from? Why do we respect human life? And for me, because my view is because we're made in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, we respect human life because it exists. And from there, I think that's where we look at that protection piece.
I respect that opinion and feel the same way myself.
Yeah.
That's a debate for another time regarding the creation and all that. But that's good to hear.
So that's one of our focuses. And so as part of that focus, I talk about relationships. We've made relationships with our local federal partners. I just recently met with the United States Attorney for the District of Arizona. We're definitely on the same page. He's also a Marine, which is great. Semper Fi.
Freaking Marines.
Exactly.
I forgot the crayons. I'm sorry.
You got to love us. Come on.
What's the saying? No greater friend, no worse enemy. 100%. Yeah. Like some of the greatest people in my lives are Marines. 100%.
So his office, they are very forward thinking and prosecuting cases of human trafficking.
Sorry, you said this was the federal
side.
Okay.
And so this goes back to that integration piece. And so we want to work with our federal partners, our ATF, FBI, our various federal partners to get in those human trafficking rings to try to stop them. And so we are completely integrated with those guys.
Does anybody think that this stuff is over just because the border's closed?
I think so.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You think that it's pretty much shut down?
The border is definitely shut down.
Okay.
I've spoken with Homeland. I've spoken with Border Patrol. Okay. It is shut down. That certainly does not mean human trafficking is over.
Right.
Just like I said, there's an action and there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now the issue is, what are they going to do?
Right.
You have to remember, we had the cocaine through the 80s in Miami. What did that create? Created, the oxys. You had the opioids. Now you have fentanyl. There's always a reaction. So we need to be very forward-looking, forward-thinking on what is that next thing? What is that next thing going to be? And this goes back to that training piece.
Yep.
We don't know what those things are unless we're looking around.
Right.
If we're looking down and in the entire time, we won't figure out what that next thing is going to be. We have to look up and out. We have to go to conferences. We have to speak to the players. We have to be integrated with our federal partners to figure out where can we get the right intel to figure out what is that next thing going to be.
Right. I know there's carfentanil out now, or xylazine, or you mean the opioid. Has this slowed the opioid down at all?
Based upon our prosecutions, I think it certainly has.
Okay.
But the question is, and I don't know the answer to this question, I think there's been a lull. I don't know if it's going to pick back up.
There's going to be new smuggling methods and smuggling routes. And I mean, we can go back to the prohibition has never fully stopped anything. No. Everybody's found a way, whether it's cigarettes or alcohol. I mean, they're still bootlegging alcohol back east. Like, this is still a thing in 2025.
Well, there's bootlegging, in the Midwest too.
Right. Yeah. And cigarettes and all that type of stuff. So it's just, it doesn't matter what the commodity is. The commodity will change in some way, shape, or form. There will be some form of smuggling of some sort. Just what is the next thing?
I think there always will be. People will always be seeking a way to check out of life.
Amen.
And I think that's the fear. It's one thing, and I assume we're going to talk about this eventually. It's one thing to stop pain, but there's another thing to check out of life.
Oh, sure.
And I think that's where the fear is, and that's where the danger is. And you can use alcohol, it can be fentanyl, it can be opioids, but when people have given up on life and they don't have hope, that's the biggest fear for human life. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do in my office is how can we support those folks who have checked out of life to get them back integrated into life. I know the military is working on this very hard because we still see a lot of suicides, unfortunately. But how do we make sure those Marines, sailors, soldiers can check back into life and we can care for them?
In that regard, I don't know what's happened now, and so I want to ask the question in regards to reintegration and after sentencing and all that type of stuff. And I understand a lot of that's Department of Corrections, your Pinal County, I understand.
And the sheriff, actually.
Right. And the question that I have is, there's so many things, like I said before, that as I've changed in my life, I recognize the fact that, you know what, we're not helping people when they get out of circumstances. Maybe whatever the case that got them into that circumstance is that case. But how are we helping them become better human beings? How are we getting them back into the workforce? That's just some of the, what is being done for that you're aware of.
Yeah, the sheriff has a really good reintegration program. They run all of those classes, but there is a big emphasis on trying to reintegrating those folks into society. But one thing that you can't change, no matter what the classes are, the counseling, you can't change somebody's attitude if they don't want it.
Amen.
And that's the difficulty. I've been on both sides of the aisle in the courtroom. I've defended cases. I've prosecuted cases. I've seen civil. I've been both the plaintiff's attorney and a defense attorney. You can't fix somebody's mindset if they don't want to change.
Right.
The question is at what point does somebody change? And if we can try to catch them early, and this goes back to some of the crime issues that we're dealing with, especially on the juvenile side, if we can catch it earlier, maybe we can prevent those problems later on. And that's where my fear is that what we're seeing is, you talk about the rise of drugs, and I think we've seen a lull. What we're seeing the rise of is juvenile crime.
Okay.
And that's very, very fearful for me, is where is this coming from? Why are juveniles threatening police officers? Why are juveniles pulling guns on cops? Why aren't they listening? Why are they acting out in school? Those are the fears that we have, and we're trying to figure out a way to combat those issues.
It's this thing right here.
I think it's part of it.
It's this thing right here. It's the lack of consequences. It's the keyboard warriors. It's the lack of, I'm sure, the world is wild right now, and parents have to work 2 and 3 jobs and 50, 60 hours a week. So their children are just out there being menaces. Yeah. I mean, I was a menace in my own way back in the day, but not the disrespect and all that type of stuff.
I had sports. That helped.
Yeah, no, I had 4-wheeling and women. So that's what I did.
Mine was football.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But so that's an issue.
Yep. That's a big issue.
How does a government organization deal with youth crime? How does that happen?
Well, to me, this goes back to that whole messaging piece, is social media, but we also have to message to lower and lower ages. How do we get out there and show that policing is not bad? How do we show that we're actually here to help, that we're not just here to prosecute? How do we get out there and show that you should have respect for government? Unfortunately, schools aren't teaching some of this. which is why I think charter schools are so popular here in Arizona, is because you're seeing basic classes, basic finance, how to balance a checkbook. I mean, we don't have a checkbook, but a checking account. Those basic skills are lacking. And I think people are seeing that. And that's why they're so fearful about what the future holds. I mean, look at Elon Musk Doge. A lot of these people have no college degree.
Right.
And they're in there changing the government because they weren't grown up into a system. They're either homeschooled or went to charter school, and they have those basic skills. And I think that's why you're seeing the rise of some of these, people doing homesteading. I think the rise of the internet, again, there's good and bad to everything. The rise of the internet, people don't need to depend on going through a school system anymore. Right. You can learn everything you want from your phone.
Absolutely. You just need the motivation and the drive. You can start businesses in a day now, and you can learn how to podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can learn how to do all this type of stuff. Yeah, and it just depends upon but you got to have the motivation and the drive
and any skill.
Yes.
But that's where it's really good because of the technology that we have, that people can find things that they're interested in. About a year or so ago, I walked into my youngest son's room and I found out he was teaching himself Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. I've never been to Japan. Like, where did this interest come from? And he just said, Dad, I'm interested in it. So I said, this is fantastic. Right. Good for you. So we hired a tutor online and who lives in Tokyo, and he now does classes 2 to 3 times a week.
That's awesome.
But it's one of those things where without the rise of the internet, without the availability of this new medium, he wouldn't have any ability to learn that.
It's out there. People just need to go out and get it. I'm dealing with the issue of a 17-year-old that wants to do nothing right now. So, but I love.
Well, you got to find out where the interest is.
I know.
I think that's the hard part.
Yes.
Is us getting probably government getting more into schools, introducing the sheriff's office, my office, showing that there is hope. I was at an event last week down in San Manuel. I don't know if you even know where that is.
I do know where it's at.
You do?
Yes,
Good.
Yes.
Good. Well, you're one of the few, but it's a beautiful community, very nice people. But a young man, I think he was 15 or 16 years old, approaches me and says, "How do I become an attorney?" And of course, I was more than excited to talk to him about it. But I told him this. I said, "Do you know how many attorneys there are in this area? Maybe one,
no,
if any, 0. So we have all of these communities all throughout our state that have none of these professions. And that's where we need to get people to, is have people given up on their belief that they can become a doctor or a lawyer or a politician or something like that. And I think that's where we can come in and give them a little bit of hope.
There's so many places, particularly in small town Pinal County, that are forgotten.
Yeah.
There are small town, I don't know if it's still the case, but like some of the mines, some of the largest mines in Arizona are in Pinal County.
Absolutely.
And what people don't realize is that the companies have moved in and bought the mine, and the city is on the outskirts of the mine. Therefore, that city doesn't get a penny.
Correct.
In taxes.
Yep.
So therefore, there's no economic viability. You can go work for that mine, sure, but I heard that they're actually hiring people from outside of the town because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And they bust them in. So you have no economic viability. You have low socioeconomic status. You have people seeing their people are driving Bugattis and everything and Lamborghinis on the phone or on the internet. So now you've got crime and pent up energy and no education and no hope.
Well, and that's where, to me, true leadership comes in, is bring in a mayor or somebody who has a vision for that place and figure out a way to get it done through federal grants, through giving people hope, through schooling. I think that's where the charter schools are coming in. I don't know if you saw the latest statistics, but Mississippi and Alabama now have higher test scores than New York.
I haven't seen that. No.
And the reason why is because they've started to rethink their educational system. They said, we need to not go the new age, the new way. Let's get back to the basics of math, writing, reading, finances, balancing a checkbook. All of those basic things they went back to, and now they're outperforming everybody else.
When you were on the last time, you had brought up the schooling before. We had this conversation. It's obviously you're passionate about it. Yep. And you had stated in the previous conversation that we had about getting all of the woke DEI stuff and all of that out of the education system.
Yep.
And I was just curious if there was an angle on that regarding the Pinal County Attorney's Office.
So, obviously there are some state laws regarding DEI. We haven't seen any of that in Pinal County, but I think it all goes back to the reason why people are rejecting DEI is because it's not merit based. Right. And I think that's people's biggest fear is, are people promoting not based upon merit, but because who you're connected to? And to me, this all goes back to why the government changed over so significantly in 2024 is people are tired of seeing politicians who have very little skill being, having $500 million. Yeah. Why are they earning this kind of money? Where is the money going? Is there corruption going on in the government? I think that's why Doge is so popular. People are just generally frustrated about where our dollars go, who it's going to. And so this goes back to the education piece, is it needs to be merit-based.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
People with very little skill should not be the ones earning the money, but why are they?
Right.
And people see that backwards. It's a completely backward society. And I think that's why the Republican message is so popular, is getting back to basics. It should be based on what you earn, what you do, not based on what the color of your skin or how you act or how you identify. People are just tired of it.
I think there's like this famous quote or saying that's like based on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Somebody famous said it. I don't remember his name.
Yes. Good old Dr. King.
Right. Yes. It's like, I just don't understand how everything is race-based. I just don't understand how that is.
I'm not sure. I think what people really want is really a meritocracy.
Absolutely.
I think in the end, people get their identity for what they earn, what they do from their family. And those are the things that we need to get back to.
I agree. How do you reach kids, though, youth, to instill that drive in them if they have a shitty home life?
Yeah, it can be tough. But in the end, that's why people join the military.
Amen.
That we have a term called esprit de corps, right? It's that unit cohesiveness. How do you bring people in? How do you connect somebody to a vision? Well, the military does this very well, and the Marine Corps, I think, does it the best.
I agree with that statement.
And the way they do it is they make it hard, they make it merit-based, and then they have a singular vision about what you're supposed to be doing. That's how. It's very simple. I think DEI makes everything so complicated. Nobody even knows what it is. That's even the argument on the left, is like the Republicans or the conservatives are saying this and this about DEI. Well, because it's so squishy, it has no meaning. It's nothing. There's no education. A person goes into this field and it's just so squishy. It's not science-based. It's nothing-based. It's feelings-based.
It's feelings-based.
People don't want that.
No.
I think in the end, people know that they haven't accomplished anything.
On a personal level, I recognize the fact that the harder something has been in my life to do, the more rewarding it is.
That's exactly right. Even if you fail.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
That's another piece I think is missing from school. Why aren't we failing kids? Not because we want to fail them, but they need to know what their limits are. Everything that every great person who's ever succeeded has failed a lot.
Amen.
Martin Luther King was one of those very folks. Right. He succeeded greatly, but he also had a lot of personal failings too. Michael Jordan, we look at the athletes of today, look at some of the politicians of today. They had great failings. Ronald Reagan, one of my favorites, he failed and failed multiple times before he was able to overcome those things.
I look at even Elon Musk. I mean, he talks about, people could sit there and say whatever they want. Take him totally out of the government. Like, stop. The man has employed more people than all of us will, has built things, and he's also stated that he expects to fail.
Correct.
This is going to go boom. Yep. I have to make it go boom because I need to figure out what the failure point is.
Exactly.
But that's part of grit, though. That's part of grit and just personal perseverance and fortitude.
And I think that's what people appreciate even in our politicians. I think that's why Trump is able to connect with people. People say, well, he's a billionaire. That's true. But he still acts like us. He still fails like us. He still feels human like us. And that's why he can connect with others.
Amen.
And I think we see other people like that too.
Well, and just simply being your authentic self. And to get just this conversation here, just simply being your authentic self and talking about, you can integrate those little personal things and then how this affects your office, but this is the vision and all that type of stuff. And it brings humanity and it brings humility as well. You can get to see your shortcomings and be like, oh, just hearing a different perspective.
Yep. Well, and I think that, again, that's what connects you to others is the humbleness, but the failure that you've tried and failed, that you're trying to do something. I think that's what connects anybody to these great folks.
Amen. Amen. I want to ask you a couple questions in regards to interpretations of the law.
Okay.
If you don't want to talk about this, that's fine.
No, it sounds good.
I just have it's just a very 50,000 foot view.
Okay.
Are you aware of the Arizona hemp wars?
I know some of it.
Okay.
I know we're a party to one of the lawsuits.
Correct.
I was personally sued. Well, as part of my office.
Correct.
I want to say last week. So I can't talk too much about the actual case.
Sure.
But yes.
And it all stems from Attorney General's memo.
Correct.
And THC drinks and all that type of stuff.
Yep.
I'm involved in the cannabis community.
Yep.
There is no, I don't hide that in any way, shape, or form. I'm the executive director of Arizona Normal.
Yep. Yep.
That's what the green part is of blue to green. You know this.
Yep.
Some people might not know. But it's just one of these things where it's outside view looking in. It's from an opinion based. There's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
So there just seems to be a little bit of.
Yeah. Again, I can't go into the details of the specific lawsuit, but I will say from the Attorney General's perspective, her view is that if somebody's going to sell like a beverage, for instance, with something with an intoxicant in it, we should at least have some sort of regulatory body looking at what that intoxicant is and what the effects are of that intoxicant. And so without any type of licensure, there needs to be some regulation on selling things to somebody that can cause problems, like an intoxicating beverage. I think that's basically her opinion.
Gotcha.
And it's my understanding that the other side is looking at, well, you don't have the authority to regulate this under federal law. That's essentially what they're saying, because hemp was taken out of the 2018 Farm Bill, right? Depending on what the issues are.
Yes.
But again, going back to the Attorney General's opinion, her opinion essentially says that if it's going to be intoxicating, there needs to be some sort of regulation. There needs to be some sort of understanding of what this thing is and how it affects people and who can sell it, and at least some understanding of who it's being sold to. Let me go back. This was one of the issues we dealt with in probably 2011, 2012 with bath salts.
Oh, God. Yeah. I hear you.
I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
So we dealt with a lot of these. Again, I obviously was not county attorney at that time, but I was a prosecutor in the Marine Corps. And so we had a lot of Marines going to local businesses, buying bath salts at a gas station, smoking them one time and becoming so high and intoxicated that they literally lost their minds. We had one individual that smoked at one time and he couldn't stop scratching his own face off. It was one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. We had to put the guy into a straitjacket, lock him up so that he wouldn't literally scratch his own face off.
Stuff is wild.
I'm sure you heard of about that case in Miami where guy almost tried to eat somebody else. And so that's, I think, part of that worry is that if we're going to be putting something into our flood of commerce, what is the thing that we're dealing with? Has this thing been tested?
This is a total personal statement.
Sure.
So this is, again, coming from having enforced it.
Sure.
Having chased down drug loads down the I-10 and done all that good stuff. THC is the most benign subject or substance on the planet. Yeah. I know there's the whole, like I said, the legal side that has to be battled out in court. Yep. And again, this to me, having read both sides of it, this very much appears to me to be letter of the law, spirit of the law, and the two are conflicting. Yeah. Again, that's just based on my 50,000 foot view of that. Yeah, but I mean, like now, again, my own personal feelings and what the path that I've led is like, it's just weed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just weed.
Well, here's the problem that we're seeing is we average in Pinal County alone almost one traffic death per weekend.
Gotcha.
Ever since I've been in office, we average about one. And almost 100% of those is related to either alcohol or marijuana.
Sure.
And I think that's what people see is like, what is the problem? How do we stop this? We have innocent people who are dying on our streets. Is there something that we can do to fix this issue?
There's always the safety component. There always is. And it's the sort of thing, though, too, that when it comes to we can't regulate morality.
Correct.
You know, people are going to do what they're going to do. And the thing that I've always stated, and I've been open and honest from the very beginning, is I'm a cannabis advocate, is it's not the drug, it's the relationship to the drug. You know, and is somebody going to, you know, drink too much and get in their car and kill somebody? It's entirely possible. Is somebody going to, you know, smoke too much or eat too many edibles and get in the car? It's entirely possible. But we can't legislate morality. So on that note, though, when it comes to the prosecution of DUIs, are you guys seeing an increase in the amount of cannabis-related ones or non-alcohol related?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
What's the prevalence?
I wish you would have asked me this before. I would have brought numbers. So I'm just quoting anecdotally, but we are seeing a big rise in THC-related DUIs.
Now, how does the Pinal County Attorney's Office deal with the fact that there's no per se limit? There's no. There's no. So there's no.
A lot of people. I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. So with alcohol, we have a 0.08 standard, which is the federal standard that Arizona adopted, and but there is no that type of standard for marijuana.
Let me clarify that for people who don't know.
Sure.
And stop me if I'm wrong along the way. The prosecutors, the defense, and the scientific and law enforcement community has agreed essentially that at a 0.08% blood alcohol concentration or above, you're drunk. You're intoxicated.
There's a presumption of intoxication.
Okay, so that's what that 0.08 means. So moving forward with the cannabis stuff.
Yeah, so there really is none with marijuana. Now, different, like for instance, in the Marine Corps, we test for marijuana. We'll do piss test, and our cutoff limit is 15 nanograms per milliliter. Okay. And then that creates a presumption of use.
Okay.
Because what they're trying to do is get rid of accidental use. You know, you walk by something, it was in a theater, or you know, whatever, the environmental factors. There is no standard like that in Arizona. So what we look at is essentially the slightest intoxication. Does it cause some sort of impairment that would prevent you from operating a motor vehicle safely? And that's the same actual standard as alcohol.
Sure. You just got so it's not necessarily going off of the nanograms per milliliter or anything like that currently.
No.
Because I will say that if there were to come a point where it's like nanograms per milliliter, I might be screwed.
Yeah.
Because you have patients who consume cannabis every day.
Well, I think that's one of the issues. You know, marijuana is probably one of the most heavily studied substances over the past 150 years.
I disagree with that statement.
Sure. Let's talk about it.
I disagree because it's still Schedule 1.
Well, it's still been studied. We have studies going back to the 1890s.
Yes, but we don't have the randomized, controlled, double-blind placebos and all that.
For what specifically?
Well, that right there is exactly the problem. For what specifically? Because there's so many different things that the cannabis plant can do. That's more if we're talking just intoxication.
Okay, I'll give you that one, but it still has been very well studied. Even prohibition, part of the people trying to pass prohibition were trying to ban marijuana at the time also. So the alcohol and marijuana have been linked for decades upon decades, for probably 150 years. And so, yes, it has been studied. It has been looked at. But I agree with you that I don't think the scientific community would ever come to, well, I don't want to say ever, but the scientific community currently has never come up with a presumptive limit of this person is intoxicated with this particular amount of nanograms per milliliter. And
the other thing is too that like on a again, I don't want to go on a stupid deep dive here on the scientific side. Yeah. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not even going to pretend to be. But it is the sort of thing though where it's like, if you have back pain and you're prescribed, go ahead and put that seal towards the camera.
Yeah,
come on now.
There you go.
If you're prescribed Vicodin or Percocet or whatever the case is, and you have back pain and you take that pill, okay, the second time you take it, you're going to feel the effects of the opioid, but it then works on the back pain. And cannabis, my personal experiences have very much been the same way. It works on the thing, whatever the thing may be. Now, again, if I overdose on, or if I take too much, okay, I'm going to be stoned. I'm going to be playing video games till 1 o'clock in the morning. But it's, Again, it's the responsible use. It's with intention and purpose. That's where I always come in from the medicinal side of the house. I don't ever want to argue with people or anything like that and say, no, we all use it for different things. Yep. There are some people that are using it strictly to escape from reality 100%. And then there's a large portion of the community that is medicinal.
Well, just like I told you, there's been a rise of THC-related DUIs. There's been also a large rise in prescription-related DUIs.
Okay.
So those, I don't know if those are hand in hand. I don't know if one is causing the other, or if they're completely separate. I don't have the data on that. But we're starting to see a lot more of that. Total
speculation.
Sure.
That I've seen studies that have shown that opioid use drops when cannabis use goes up. And people are getting off of their prescription medications when they switch over, when they finally make that switch over to cannabis, when they discover that that's what they want, the path they want to go, they get off of all those other things.
Okay.
So that's, again, I've seen some studies that show it, and that's my personal experience as well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't touch opioids anymore because those things are terrible.
Yeah. And they affect people differently.
Yes.
Yeah, very much so. But from our perspective, from a public safety perspective, our worry is the slightest intoxication. Sure. And that's what our worry is it's one thing to say, it's one thing to legalize marijuana use, but it's another thing to say that it's safe to drive necessarily. And I think that message needs to come across too, is that just because you're able to possess and use marijuana doesn't mean that you should also be driving. And for some reason that message got mixed. I don't know what happened there.
I will agree 100% with you. I would put the caveat that if you're intoxicated by the cannabis, then you shouldn't drive.
Sure.
Obviously.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% for safe usage. I'm 100% for,
But that goes for anything. It goes for medication. It goes for alcohol. It goes for anything. If you have the slightest degree of intoxication, you should not be driving.
Yeah, whether it's Benadryl or cannabis or methamphetamine.
Yep.
Or anything like that.
And that's our fear, because it really does become a public safety issue. So like I said, I think, we're averaging 1 death per weekend here in Pinal County on traffic related incidents. And to me, that's one too many.
Agreed.
We just had another one last weekend. It's extremely sad because of how many people it really does affect. It affects the family. It affects a person. If they do make it, it affects a person's psychology, obviously the financial aspects and everything that goes along with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very tragic.
Yeah, for everybody involved.
Very much.
I could go on and on and on about the cannabis stuff. That's what that's the part that I like. And again, it's the sort of, let me ask you this.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on, again, personal here, on public or government employees being allowed to use cannabis?
Well, I think to me, it goes, I look at things in from a legal framework. If the state law allows that thing to occur, then we should uphold state law, right? My job is not to create the law. Sure. Yes, I can lobby, lobby at the legislature for changes of law. But in the end, when the law comes down and the legislature and the governor have told me you need to do this thing, then my job is to execute that law. And the same thing there. If the state legislature says you can do that, then that's fine with me. But it doesn't, to me, we need to also caveat that message with, if that person is intoxicated, or depending on that person's profession, we might need to look harder at that case.
Oh yeah, intoxication on the job. No.
Yeah, I wouldn't want a situation where a person can smoke marijuana and then go drive heavy equipment, as building our roads, for instance. It's just not a good thing. Even if they're not intoxicated, I don't think that's a good precedent to set. And that's our worry is, we say we do get a traffic accident, a traffic death, we will test that person's blood. And right, we have to measure a person's standard of care. If that say we do test it and it's 8 nanograms per milliliter, we will take that into account when we're making a charging decision. So that's another thing that people need to look at is, when you're smoking, you may not feel that you're intoxicated, but that level of whatever you're at will be a factor in how we evaluate a particular case. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just telling you it's a fact.
That's good information to know. The question remains, though.
Yep.
Let's say the number's 1,000 nanograms per milliliter. Mm-hmm. What does that mean for intoxication?
Yep.
That's the problem. And I want the government to have good data.
Yep.
I want the public to understand this. Like that, this is something that I want the science on.
Yep.
Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult without more studies of figuring out what an exact level of intoxication. But that whatever that level is will be part of the indicia that we use to charge a case, how a person's operating at that time. If I think everybody would look at that, even somebody like you who is an advocate of marijuana legislation. If a bus driver was a 10 nanograms per milliliter, they hit and killed or hit and injured your son or your wife, you would take that into account.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%.
And I think anybody would.
Yeah.
Now, how that gets accounted, how that gets weighed is up to a jury.
Right.
Right. It's not up to me. It's up to me to present that information to a jury or a grand jury. And so that is an interesting issue of how a jury would weigh that. But it certainly is going to be weighed.
And especially in today's day and age, where a lot more people are cannabis friendly.
Yeah.
A lot more people are much more accepting. I just saw Arizona Peace Officer Standard Training just lowered the requirements from a 2-year break of cannabis use to 6 months. Yeah. So,
and I think we're seeing the same in the military too.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting.
Yeah. Don't quote me on that exactly, but I think that's true.
I mean, because I know Canadian military and Canadian police officers are allowed to use.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, our country is also obviously unique. Even when we're deployed overseas, General Order Number 1 always applies. We're not allowed to drink alcohol. Whereas you see other countries, it's a free for all. The Germans, the Poles, they can drink. We're just not allowed to. Obviously, we have different standards.
Right.
I think we also have a much better military.
I would definitely.
And the quality of the people and the officership are much better quality for that.
Of course, an officer would say that. I was junior enlisted, so come on now.
But have you ever worked with like the Polish military or any other militaries?
I worked all joint services.
Okay.
And then when my command was at the GRSOC under NSA.
Okay.
So I worked Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, plus other countries.
Okay.
But I didn't. I wasn't out in the field with them.
Okay.
So I actually worked with quite a surprising ones that I was walking by. I'm like, I didn't know we were on friendly terms with them, but apparently we are, and we're in a skiff right now. So okay. Yeah. So no, never out in the field.
Yeah,
no.
I've been in those situations too. It's like, this is a bit strange. Yeah. But you just go with it.
Absolutely.
But no, I think you're right. I don't know if the science is going to come up with a particular level of that. What is an intoxication level or even a presumption? But we certainly do need to take that into account. And I think unfortunately that message is being lost, especially in our younger generation, because again, going back to the juvenile issue, we're seeing a lot more juveniles with vape pens.
Sure.
And we don't know what's in some of those things. I know people don't like overregulation. I certainly don't. But when you have certain substances, toxic substances potentially, I think that's one of the reasons why RFK is getting so much traction, because he's asking a simple question that we all ask, and we would all ask of our kids and of our food, is what is in this? Is this harming me? At least tell me what's in it. Tell me whether it's harming me, whether it's going to cause me cancer or not, and then we can move on from there.
Those are very good points, though, and I'm not one of these people that will ever sit here and say we should be giving weed to kids. No. I just had a doctor, PhD, on just the one that I just talked about. We talked about kids and we talked about the brain and talked about all that stuff. No, THC cannabis is not for kids.
Correct.
It is for adults. It is for now. If you have a medical condition and you are a juvenile, that you can get a medical card and that's path. Okay, that's up to the parents. But no, it's not for kids. It's not for driving. It's not for, anything like that. It's not for getting stoned and then having a good time on a Friday night to drive there. Go get stoned and have a good time. Sure. Just don't drive.
Yep.
So I'm in complete agreement with you. And I think every law enforcement officer that let's study it.
Yep.
Let's have a green workshop, a green lab.
Which they do.
And let's take some blood and let's do some driving and let's get some studies out there and all that.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I'm not about free the weed and just let it run wild.
Yep. Yeah, that's like I said, that's our biggest concern.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
The public safety aspect of it.
Absolutely.
But you got to admit, though, you just got to wave a bag of Funyuns in front of somebody that's home and they're going to get in the car, as opposed to fighting on bath salts.
Isn't that why Peyton Manning bought all those Papa Johns in Colorado? Yeah, it worked out pretty well. I'm
Absolutely. Sure. You mentioned bath salts, and I was out on the road in patrol back in those days, and that was the nastiest substance on the planet.
Yeah. Well, that's just essentially an older version of fentanyl. It's like, we don't know what's in this thing,
right.
And they're just mixing things in there. And talk about the public safety aspect. Yeah, we don't know what we're feeding people.
It's very difficult to be. I'm a conservative Republican, and I believe in a lot less regulation. But when it comes to our health, and it comes to, and I see cannabis as a medicine, it absolutely needs regulation, and it absolutely needs testing and all that type of stuff we can find out. I've heard stories. I spoke with your predecessor in regards to a couple of cases where somebody had psychosis, had ingested high doses of very high THC, had psychosis, and I believe there was a couple murders that occurred. And I'm not ever one of these people that will say, that's not possible. No, let's study it. Let's find out what's going on. So I don't ever want to be seen as like free the weed. I want responsible. I want testing. I want regulation.
And I know there are studies out there, and that's one of the things is you talk about, THC content. The THC content is much, much higher now. You have a lot of marijuana that's lab grown, very designer type. And so we need to look at these things. How does this affect people long term?
Absolutely.
It's different than the marijuana in the 1960s.
Oh, it's different than the weed in the 90s. You said something that your office wants to always follow state law.
Yes.
There is one particular question. I've asked this question of your predecessor. I'm going to ask it of you.
Surprise.
Guns and cannabis.
Yeah, so we're dealing with obviously a conflict of laws issue. So federal law under the I think it's the Gun Control Act of 1968, essentially says you cannot possess a firearm if you are a legal possessor of marijuana. So obviously federal law, that's prohibited. State law is a little bit different in Arizona.
Obviously specific to Arizona.
Specifically to Arizona. And so with respect to like the purchase of a firearm, I still would advocate you need to be truthful when you fill out. I think it's 4474 or whatever.
4473.
Is it the 73?
Yes.
Okay, I was close. 4473. You need to be truthful on that form. Obviously, federal law takes precedent. But to me, this goes back to philosophy: is why is the federal government regulating those issues? I don't think they should be, and I think that's another reason why somebody like President Trump has stepped into that gap and closed down the Department of Education, or at least attempting to, perhaps getting rid of the IRS, because the people are tired of being regulated from the top when we can do that stuff locally and at the state level. So I'm definitely an advocate of getting rid of some of those laws so that the state of Arizona can take those issues over.
So as it stands now, though?
As it stands now, it's prohibited federally, but state, you're okay.
Okay. Now, that doesn't mean carry your firearm while you're intoxicated.
Absolutely not.
Don't carry your fire. You can, again, please tell me to stop. Like, no, that's incorrect. You can carry your cannabis and your gun on you at the same time. Just don't be intoxicated. Don't get involved in anything. Like, say you go to the shooting range, you store your gun in your car, go into the dispensary. Now, when you say
can,
does not mean should.
Well, it doesn't mean should, but also it's still a violation of federal law.
Correct. Everything.
Okay.
Well, cannabis in and of itself is a violation of federal law.
Correct.
So being in possession, yes.
So I just want people to be clear is that if you have a firearm and you are an active user of marijuana, that is a violation of federal law.
Yes.
That's not something that we can change in Arizona.
And correct. Yeah. But it wouldn't be enforced at the state level.
Correct. We don't have jurisdiction over federal issues. And so, no, it wouldn't be enforced at the state level.
What do you think personally of cannabis users having firearms rights?
To me, I think it goes back to, again, like I told you before, I think very legally in a legal structure about this, that currently as it is, because of federal law, it's illegal and improper.
Sure.
I believe that we should be regulated more locally. And so I am all for President Trump. I'm for President Trump getting rid of the suppressor rules. I'm for President Trump to have a nationwide reciprocal concealed carry and to get rid of the Firearm Control Act. Because even the way we regulate short-barreled rifles is silly to me. You can have a 14.5-inch rifle with a pinned and welded, flash hider. That is legal. But if it is 14-inch, then it's not legal. It makes no sense to me. So there's a lot of things that I don't think it makes sense that we need to get rid of, and I think that's one of those things.
That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of all of our rights. That's all I'm going to say.
I'm a big fan of all of our rights also. And my job to me is enforcing those things to the best of our ability so that we can ensure that everybody's rights are being equally weighed.
Yeah, that's all I ever say on that topic personally. I'm a big fan of all of our rights.
I think we need to get the federal government out of our business.
I agree.
I really wish they would.
How does the federal government impact a county attorney?
Yeah. It depends on the issue. So I talked about some of those child sex stings that we ran. The federal government was involved in some of those.
Okay.
Providing intel or support, sometimes funding. We actually will get funding from a federal agency to create a joint task force to put all these pieces together. Because oftentimes you'll have a smaller, we talk about some of the smaller towns and cities in like, for instance, Pinal County, who don't have the resources to run one of those. So they'll ask for a grant from the federal government in order to run that joint task force to protect their people.
Do they have any, I mean, obviously they're not charging or anything like that, but just as far as...
They could.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can split them off. So they can take some federal issues, the ones that they want, and then we can take the state.
Gotcha.
And then vice versa.
Gotcha.
It's the same thing with some of the border issues. That's one of the things that President Trump pushed was to federalize some of the local agency partners. And I don't know if you saw pushback from like Cochise County, I think Yuma, and some of those others. Like, you want us to enforce federal law.
I did actually. Yeah, I did.
Yeah. You want us to enforce federal law, but you're not providing funding or telling, like, protecting us from Federal Torts Claims Act issues or something like that. You want us to do the work, but you're not providing any funding for it.
And I know that there was a big thing about space in the jails as well. And all that. That's particularly down in Sierra Vista.
That's exactly right. Is they don't have the money to house these folks. You know, it's expensive to put somebody in jail. I think in some of our smaller towns and counties, you're talking about maybe $200 to $500 a day. It's a lot.
That is a lot of money.
They don't have that. They don't have the money for that, oftentimes. And so, if the federal government wants you to enforce federal law, and they're telling that local agency to do it, and all of a sudden they have, say, 10 people in that jail, you're talking about $5,000 a night, $4,000 a night, when their entire budget for the year is like $10,000.
No.
It can't happen.
And you know as well as I do that one human smuggling load might have 30 people in it.
Exactly. And so where do you put them all? And so these are those practical problems that, you know, again, it's neat that we can talk about it on a podcast, but you don't hear in a 30-second clip of what are the second order effects, the third order effects of these policies, and how does it affect local agencies? Yep. And so we do need to talk about them.
It's the unintended consequences.
That's exactly right.
It's fantastic that you want to do this, but hey, we need a much bigger support system.
Yeah. In the Marine Corps, we call it the good idea fairy, right? It's a good idea from the top, but then the corporals and the sergeants are like, oh my gosh, sir, like this isn't going to work. We can't do it.
That I do love the military rank structure. The problem is that there's always like an E8 or an E9 hanging out with the officer. You need an E2 to an E4. You need to bridge that gap.
Yes, that's what the E5 is supposed to do. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
No, I think we need to look at all of these policies and how it affects people, and that's one of those issues is on the human smuggling side. How do we provide the support to local government that, and how do we get the money to them in a bureaucracy like the federal government, and hopefully through at least these next 4 years we can try to make those issues efficient where they can deploy those funds in order to get at the policies that they need.
And who better to know the border issues than the people on the border?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Why aren't they asking? Right. This is the same thing you do in the military. You know, the people give the military a bad time of everything is dictated from the top. That is not my experience. I had very good leaders in the Marine Corps, and I still do. And it's always the best leaders that I ever knew would ask the E2s, E3s, E4s, E5s, hey, what's going on? How do we make this thing better? Who's talking to who? Right? The Lance Corporal Underground. It's those people you need to be talking to figure out what's really happening in your organization.
Absolutely.
And it's the same thing here in Arizona.
It's the sort of thing where the middle management always wants to hide what's actually going on. They want to make themselves look better. Yeah. No.
But you see that. But if we can make some of those issues efficient, get rid of some of the departments that aren't needed, then I think we can have a better functioning government.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Get you guys some money as well.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
People don't realize again, it's okay, so it's the third most populous, but of the amount of stuff that goes through Pinal County.
Oh yeah.
It's the wild, wild west out here.
Yeah. Well, especially with all of our county land.
Yes.
You know, because in Maricopa obviously is very large too, but you have such large cities who can police those areas, figure out what's going on. But you're talking about what squatters are doing out in the middle of rural Pinal County. You don't know. And that's where we're seeing a lot of those crime, a lot of the juvenile crime. Yeah.
Out in the deserts?
Out in the deserts.
Interesting.
Because once you get outside the city, it's not policed.
Right.
You know, the sheriff's office has such a large burden to carry all of those areas. They can't police the entire thing all the time. They do such a fantastic job, but it is a lot of land area.
It's a lot of land area, and that's a tiny little department for the land area. Like that was the surprising thing to me when I started becoming more and more friends with the sheriffs. It was like, oh, you guys got a large responsibility for a little tiny area.
Yeah, and that's what the advantage of if Santan Valley incorporates. Think all of a sudden that it becomes a town,
Right.
And now you have those services. You have a mayor, you have a structure, you have a police force. And now the sheriff can start policing some of the more rural areas.
And I very much believe in community policing. I believe that the community itself needs to police itself and have people from within the community that are on the department, that are in the prosecutor's office, that are in the counties and, in the neighborhoods that they serve.
You need buy-in.
Absolutely.
And the same thing with local elected leaders is those local elected leaders obviously need to live in that place because they have buy-in. Their kids go to school in that location. They care about that place. It's the same thing with me here in Pinal County. You know, my kids go to school here. They play sports here. I'm invested here. I raise my animals here. This is a community that I care about. And so when the people come to me with their concerns, I have a lot of those same concerns.
You're in the community.
We are.
What animals?
Well, my daughter just finished. She was part of a 4-H group.
Okay.
And so she was raising some hogs.
Okay.
And so she just sold a couple at the Pinal County Fair.
Nice.
So when I say we're invested in the community, we're literally in the community. We just slaughtered a couple for ourselves. And so our fridges and freezers are full right now.
Very cool.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a chicken coop coming soon.
Oh,
so
nice. Yeah,
I'm on that homesteading front.
I love it. Yeah, we have chickens, goats, couple of cows.
Nice.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, but you're grounded here in the community.
That's right.
What made you successful in your campaign to win the spot that you're in?
I think it goes back to listening to the people. You know, it talks about that ground up leadership. What do the people care about? And I think the number one thing people cared about was the crime, issues of crime, issues with border. They want to feel safe.
Yeah.
You know, it goes back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't feel safe, then you can't do anything else.
Right.
You know, if we're not prosecuting crime appropriately, if people are getting away with child sex trafficking, if juveniles are committing crime and getting away with it, then what kind of community do we have? And so that's one of the things that we've stepped up enforcement. We've changed. Sometimes we don't even give plea agreements in certain cases, especially like our child sex trafficking cases, because these people shouldn't be in our community anymore. And we need to be careful.
Was the Pinal County Attorney's Office involved in the Gilbert Goons?
No.
There was no.
Well, let me rephrase that. I believe we had one in one of the communities. Okay. Yeah. But he was not part of the main body of the Gilbert Goons.
And the Arizona people will know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially what the Gilbert Goons are, for the audience, is it was a group of mostly young men, and they would drive around a community, look for somebody walking by themselves, and they would go literally beat them up, stomp them, beat them up, sometimes use of brass knuckles. It was very, very violent. And just picking on somebody who was just walking on the street. And
one of them ultimately led to a murder.
They did.
Yeah, led to a murder in in Queen Creek.
Mm-hmm. I think it was in Gilbert.
Was it?
I think so.
Yeah. All youth driven.
Very youth driven. You know, stupid idea. Yeah. Should have never occurred. But think about the mentality. What does it take for one human being to go think this person's walking by themselves? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to beat them up. I'm going to have all my friends do it, and we're going to film it and laugh about it. How does that happen? I think that's the issue we need to address.
They're dehumanizing. It's that person that's walking down the road is not seen as a human being to them.
Yeah, but how does that happen?
I don't know. I don't understand. I've never understood the mentality of being cruel just to be cruel.
I don't know. I can't figure it out either. But there was obviously a large group of them that did, and it's something that I can't figure out. And I don't know if that's because of parenting. I don't know if it's something we missed in school. I don't know.
And then that mob mentality kicks in. no matter what the situation is, and now it just escalates and escalates and escalates from there.
Yep. It become popular. Again, that's another interesting thing about the military is, I'm sure you did it too, but we talk about, killing. We have to talk about the things we may need to do, but at the same time, it's controlled. We still have compassion. We still care about human beings.
Absolutely.
Our number one goal is to prevent the loss of human life. And I don't know where that got missed with some of these kids, but it definitely did.
There's been just a demoralization and dehumanization of human life. Mm-hmm. And I've learned that I did a lot of violence in my law enforcement career. Mm-hmm. I chased a lot of bad guys. I was in a lot of pursuits, all of the pursuits and the human smuggling and the drug smuggling and everything. I did all that. Yep. And I've chased and I've had a lot of fights with people. And I've learned that those who are familiar with violence the most stay the furthest away from it.
Yeah.
I want no part of being violent in my life anymore. I want no part of those sorts of actions because I've done them to other human beings through the course of my job, and now see human life as precious. It was precious then, it's precious now, but I don't understand how we get so far disconnected as children. Our kids get so disconnected.
I don't know. Some of it could be related to abuse, I'm certain. Some of it probably is parenting, but also schools. Schools can't do everything. They need to educate, but sometimes you wonder if they can catch some of these folks. I don't know. We recently down in Coolidge, a kid threatened to bring a gun to school and shoot up his teacher. How does that happen as a child? Thinking that that's the way out.
Right. Was it a cry for help?
I don't know.
I had a school shooter on the podcast.
Oh, okay.
About a year ago.
And what did they say?
And theirs was a plea for help. There was some issues growing up with the child and all that good stuff. And then it was just attention seeking and attention seeking behavior. Luckily, he did not kill anybody. But yeah, it was attention seeking behavior and then not really having any way out. And then he said that once he committed he actually just kind of went into psychosis.
Why did he need attention?
That's, I don't remember specifically, but I will go back and listen. But it was the sort of thing where there was some mental health issues, and he's open and honest about his mental health and all that. I chat with the person every once in a while now. But yeah, it was interesting to hear his perspective as to the reason why he thought that was the thing to do. And it's just like there was no rational, because they wanted the other person to feel pain.
Yeah. But think about how big your ego has to be. How big of a narcissist you have to be to think like that.
Yep.
How that is acceptable behavior. And I'm wondering, you talk about the phones and the issues with that. It all feeds into that ego loop. And I'm wondering if some of that is causing some of these issues we're seeing.
I think a lot of it has to do with not even an ego, but a lack of an ego or lack of self-confidence. And this is the thing I got to do to get popular. And this is the thing I got to do to be, I'm sure, have you seen on the news these wild ass influencers that are going abroad and doing stupid things and getting arrested? Yep. It's like, well, yeah, you can't be a jackass like that the rest of your life. There's consequences. But they're seeing this type of jackassery and foolery. And I'm going to say tomfoolery and really show my age.
Well, to me, I look at that as the ultimate ego trip.
Yeah.
Because that's what they want.
Okay.
They have to feed into that ego. But, where did the mentality come from? To me, it's like the difference. I don't know if you ever saw that Michael Jordan documentary. It's
the 4 or 5 part one.
Correct.
Yes, I saw part of it. Yes.
I think what makes somebody like that great and why we appreciate him versus maybe another player like LeBron James is the drive to excellence as being part of a team, but not being an egoist.
Yep.
Yes, he was hard on the other players, but he wanted the best out of them. He cared more about others than himself constantly. Service
before self.
You have to. And I think that seems to be the key to life that I wonder if people are teaching anymore. Is that I think that you can get everything, there's an old phrase, you can get everything that you want if you assist others in getting what they want. And I wonder if we taught that more, we taught humility more people would be happier and they wouldn't seek those things. Because think about why would you seek to go overseas and knock over rocks or a petroglyph? And I think we saw that here in Arizona or in Utah. I think it was in Utah. But why? Why do something like that? Just to get a few clicks? It's just silly. What do you really want? Is that something that you really desire?
It's the attention.
But why?
Ego.
It's that. Yeah.
Amen.
It's a strange mentality. Strange.
I think you nailed it, though, that we're not giving kids any, they don't have any motivation to help or serve or to be out in the community or to be a part of those things. And the ones who are that, they're the successful ones.
They are.
They're the ones that are moving on and doing great things in life.
And I think when people are fighting DEI, what they're really fighting is that. They want things to be hard so that kids fail and understand what their limits are, because that humbles them. And then how that person reacts to those moments is what makes character. It's all of those hard things that build character, that build humbleness, that I think are all the things we're actually seeking. And we're seeking it in a different way outside of that process to build. We want that popularity through the easy way. You know, one of the most popular YouTubers is named Mr. Beast. And people think he just came into fame.
No.
They don't see the 20 hours a day he was working and grinding for years and years and years and years and years to get to where he is. You have to hand it to people like that who are willing to work and work and work and grind at their profession and getting losses. You know, one of my favorite books, I'm not a big Stephen King fan personally. But I like the way he writes.
Sure.
Actually, my favorite book is not one of his fiction novels. It's actually one of his nonfiction. It's called On Writing.
Okay.
Have you read that?
I'm familiar with it. It's on how to write.
Correct.
Yes.
And so one of the things that he talked about is how unsuccessful he was in the beginning.
Okay.
That he would write to newspapers over and over and over again, and he was rejected literally hundreds of times. And he kept going, and he kept going, and he kept going. And it was through that process that he learned what the audience wanted. And I think that's, you know, you asked me before, what made my campaign successful? I think that was part of that, is going out to the audience, learning what they wanted, learning what was important to them, and knocking on doors. We knocked on probably 20 to 30,000 doors.
It's a lot.
In a county. In the heat, grinding it, asking people questions, just simple questions. What do you think about the community? Do you know who your elected leaders are? What issues do you care about? So we actually knew what people cared about because we asked them.
Yeah.
And we spent the time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. And I think that's what made us successful. And now we're starting to deliver on those promises of attempting to protect the community, getting into the community, connecting with local leaders. You know, I've met most of the police chiefs in the county. I'm getting processes in place. You know, I'm part of what's called the Pinal County Law Enforcement Association, where we actually meet, I think it's once a month or once every other month, to talk about what are the general issues in the community. And one of the main things they wanted from us was communication, and simple things like what issues in the law are happening. You know, we send a legal update to all the police chiefs in the entire county. Here are the cases that came down. Here are the new issues. Here's our number. You can communicate with us at any time. One of the other big changes we made to the office is we have what's called a community-based prosecution model, where we actually probably about once a week or once every other week, one of our prosecutors actually goes into a police station and sits there for a day and asks and answers any questions that they may have. So police officers can now come and say, hey, I'm a little embarrassed to talk to my boss about this. Here's an issue that I had. How would you deal with it? Or what should I expect when I testify next week? Or, you know, what is the prosecutor like? What policy would you have on this? If I submitted this case to you, what issues am I missing? You know, just to have that communication. And I think us reaching out to them saying, we're here to help. We're here to provide a service. I look at my office as a public service, community service organization first. And then we have got a huge positive response from our police chiefs.
That, I'm thinking back to my own experience here.
Yeah.
Would have been amazing.
Yeah.
To have a prosecutor sit there and explain things. I don't think people understand that to be a police officer, you just got to be 21 years old with a high school diploma. To be an attorney, you need significantly more education. And again, looking back on my previous experience, I wish that I would have had someone who's doing the prosecuting side with more education, explaining the reasons why.
Yeah.
All the cops want to go out, and I'm not talking smack. I love my Pinal County. I'm not talking smack. They want to go out and be cops.
Yep.
They don't want to do the paperwork.
Yep.
But until it is explained how important that paperwork is on the back end for prosecution and following through, and until that actual connection and that click is made in the person's brain, they're going to continue to shortchange the Pinal County prosecutor's or attorney's office and the victim.
Yeah.
If they're not doing a good job of their paperwork. That would have been amazing. That's awesome to hear that you're doing that.
Yeah,
that's
we're
very cool.
We're doing that. We're getting a huge positive response. A lot of the police officers are now speaking to us. And what we're finding are gaps in training, in communication, and not to skyline anybody or act as a blue falcon, but we're really trying to get down to those issues of how do we improve policing? What do we do in cases of people with mental health? How do we handle these issues? And to me, us putting, again, I use a lot of Marine Corps terms because that's what my background is, but we call it kneecap to kneecap leadership. Actually sitting down with somebody, saying that I care, going through what those issues are, figuring out what that other person's problems are, right? Because we care about others before we care about ourselves. And that's the same thing with these officers is like, what issues are you actually dealing with? And I think at first some of the officers were very reluctant. Like, what is this thing? Is this new? Is this going to last? I don't know who this person is. They're just here to get me in trouble.
Sure.
But once the relationship gets started and once that relationship is warmed up, they're now coming to us with issues and problems and seeking our advice. And it's not just us dictating to them. It's really a collaborative effort. Like, here's how we could do that better. Here's something we want from you. We've had demands on our office. Hey, by the way, your form sucks. If you would change it this way, it would make it more efficient for us to process. Or one of the other issues is testifying at a grand jury. We're like, oh, you don't like doing that? They're like, hell no, we don't like doing that. Okay, well, how can we make it better? Can we appear remotely? Sure, we can figure that out. We'll put a computer in the office. Or we want to seek a higher bond on certain cases. How do we fix that? What do you suggest? We would ask the officers. Can we just email you a recommendation you provide it to the judge? Absolutely, we can do that. See what I'm saying? It's the simple things that unless you ask the questions, unless you show that you care, you're not going to get that type of feedback. And that's what we're seeing.
That there never once in a million years did I ever think that. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
That's from my own experience. That's the county attorney's office over there, and we're over here, and they just screw things up and they send things back. Correct. And they don't explain anything. Yep. And they said no likelihood of prosecution. Correct. And they didn't tell me why. Yeah. It's like, are you kidding me? Yeah. No, this is awesome to hear. Yeah,
that was one of the biggest frustrations that we heard is we don't know why. And I thought, well, why aren't we telling you why? Have we made phone calls? So we've added processes in my office to, if we have to turn down a case or something, well, we'll call the officer and at least explain it to them. If you rephrase this or got that or did this, we won't necessarily turn that down. Or here's one of the other big issues that we saw, again, from asking the same questions is if there's because in every community, there's somebody that everybody knows. We all know that.
A frequent flyer.
Yes, we call frequent flyers. And so how do we deal with those issues? Now, it may just be a series of maybe infractions or misdemeanors, but it's building. And every police officer or people on the ground who care about the community knows that this is building to a big problem. Yep. It's like those domestic violence situations when you hear the yelling and the screaming night after night after night, and then the murder happens and everybody's like, yep, I saw that coming. Well, wouldn't that have been nice to get that information to us where we can try to fix that issue? And so that's what we're trying to do is be proactive about gathering that information so we can find who those frequent flyers are and not necessarily just to lock them up. That's not our goal. Let's figure out what's the problem. What is the issue?
That's what I was going to say. How do you earn that person's trust to not just be thrown in jail?
Yeah. And I think we go talk to them. That's how you do it.
Are there resources that the counties can provide?
Yes.
That's the part that the wraparound services that are missing.
And that's the neat thing about partnerships. And that's what we're trying to do is not create just government partnerships, but NGO partnerships. Yep. Like, for instance, I just had the directors of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, in my office. And through our partnership with them, they can provide a lot of services that we cannot. So say you have a traffic death case that doesn't result in a criminal prosecution because sometimes the defendant dies in the accident. Well, we can't prosecute a dead body. Right. It's right. It doesn't make any sense. But so we don't have a prosecution, so it doesn't trigger my office. But what if that person needs counseling services because they live? Yep. Now what do? Well, guess what? We have an NGO that can fill in that gap, that can assist them and are willing to provide counseling services for those folks. Without us creating those partnerships, we wouldn't have that. So now we can offer that to our community. And that's exactly what we're doing.
That's awesome to hear. Mm-hmm. That's very cool.
Yep.
So I did forget to do something in the very beginning.
Okay.
So if this part's not allowed and it's bribery, I apologize. But all my county guys get hats.
All right.
So I was told that if I keep the cost under a certain amount, that it's okay for the county attorney's office to take.
I think our limit is $10 or $15.
Okay, well then it's a $5 hat.
Okay, I appreciate that.
So
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. That's
I
cool.
just thought about that when we were going on, and I saw it and popped in my head, and I didn't want to forget.
I love it.
But
thank you.
No, I'm all of the stuff that you're talking about in regards to, like, you know, it's just simple communication.
Yeah.
It's just simple bridging the gap between, you know, we're all part of the government, we're all part of the law enforcement.
Yep.
It's all part of the law.
But why aren't we talking?
But why aren't we talking?
Yeah, and I don't know why. Because I had a very simple law practice before, and people would see friction points, and I would just say, well, why don't we call them and figure out what the problem is?
Right.
Let's be direct. You know, a lot of these people want to get to the point and figure out what the problems are. So we call them and let's figure it out. You know, maybe we won't be friends. We won't be drinking buddies. Fine. But as long as we can figure it out together, you know, we have a same vision of where we want to go, then let's work together to try to get there.
I think everybody has a fundamental, foundation of safe streets, decent place for my kids to grow up, stuff like that. We all just have our own little opinions on how we should get there.
Yeah.
But again, if nobody's talking to each other, then how are we going to accomplish anything?
Well, and that's what's neat about putting community groups and people together is come up with a solution. You know, we have different committees in my office to solve problems. It's like, I don't, just because I'm elected doesn't mean I have all the answers. And let's be honest, most of the time the elected people don't have all the answers.
But that's the humility to know that you don't have all the answers is a good start.
But so we'll put together a committee to provide recommendations. And again, it goes back to Marine Corps leadership. You know, I work for colonels and generals, and the best ones that I saw had committees and advisors of people that would work on solutions. And they would go through what we call the Marine Corps planning process of let's plan this issue, figure out what those courses of action are, and then we can decide together what the best solution to that problem is. That's how it should be. It should be ground up,
Amen,
not top down. And that's how we're trying to run this organization is what are the people on the ground seeing? What is my bureau chief of juvenile seeing? What is the bureau chief of our vehicular crimes unit seeing? So we have regular communication. I talk to them to figure out what are the issues, what are the problems. You know, for instance, the bureau chief of my juvenile division came to me and said, "Hey, we're having major problems with some of these group homes." I said, "That's an interesting issue." And so I don't know if you know this, but group homes in Arizona are not allowed to keep kids, so you have frequent runaways. So if a person is under custody of, for lack of a better term, of like a DPS, or I'm sorry, DCS, then they'll put that person in a group home. Obviously, the state pays for them. But that home can't keep them, so that person can keep running away. So if they run away and commit a crime...
When you say can't keep them, do you mean physically restrain them?
They can't physically restrain them in the home.
Gotcha.
So you have these, unfortunately, typically young women, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, who are being sold. You talk about where's the sex trafficking, that's where it is. That's where some of it is. They're leaving, being pimped out, and then they come back to the group home, right? We can catch the pimp, but how do we stop this young female from leaving the group home?
Right.
What is that? How do we fix that problem? Or what if these folks are going out in the community and damaging, say they live in a HOA or a nice community, damaging people's garages? Who's held responsible for this? And is the solution just to lock that person up? What is the solution? How do we attack these issues? And so what we did is I said, I don't know the answer to that. There's a huge problem. And so what we did is we got all the players in the same room. We got our local judge, we got DCS, we got some of the members of our bureau and some other folks in a room and said, how do we resolve this issue? Now, I won't say it's completely resolved, but at least we have courses of action that we're working on to try to look at these issues. Like, what do we do with these kids?
Well, just acknowledging the problem is, 50% of them, figuring it out.
Yeah.
You have given me a ton of your time. Holy Jesus, we're at an hour and 45 minutes. So there is another person in the room too. So she's been sitting here very patiently as well. So last thing I wanted to ask you specifically about, and it's actually kind of ties into this reintegration and having the communication with people and all that type of stuff. And what is your thoughts on the expungements? And people getting their lives back on track. And now there's expungements, set-asides, and did they just start doing sealing?
Yeah,
I
so
think.
you can get your records sealed depending on certain circumstances. And I know a lot of, at least my office, when we get requests for people to seal their records for like marijuana offenses, we're granting all of those. And so I would encourage, if anybody has that and they've complied with probation and done everything they need to do, submit something to my office and we will absolutely support sealing of your record.
So this is me totally going on a limb.
Okay.
I'm going to get something thrown at me in a second.
Sure.
I had a verbal agreement with your predecessor about doing some expungements in conjunction with my organization.
Yep.
So that is something that we had talked about. We also talked about it with a couple of other county attorneys, the Navajo County attorney, and we would love to attend. Again, I'm just throwing this out there, man. I would love to do something with a county attorney's office that says, come, we've got the process streamlined. My organization's got the whole thing done and down. And it's just a matter of spitting out the paperwork and then turning it over to the superior court.
Yeah, obviously we have to turn it into court. So
Right,
there's a process we have to go through. I mean, do you have numbers? Do you have people from Pinal County?
Oh, we could get those numbers, but my organization as a whole has done over 3,000 expungements.
Okay.
And we don't do we do the paperwork and the educational piece, and then give the people what they need, and then they submit it.
No, I think it's important because to me it goes back to our upholding people's rights.
Right.
And it's their right. If they want to submit the paperwork, we will support them getting their rights restored.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Cool.
I think that's extremely important. And part of my job isn't just prosecution; it's to do justice. And I think justice in these circumstances, the public looks at marijuana convictions and other types of issues differently now. And so we need to take that view. We need to follow what the law is, and the law is to allow it. So yeah, if you submit it, we'll support it.
Awesome. Well, Brad, Mr. Miller, we've done an hour and 45 minutes.
All right.
Thank you. Is there anything else that that I always like, because I never remember everything. Yep. So I wanted to talk about expungements, guns, and then the other stuff. So is there anything else that you want to?
I would just probably like to tell everybody, again, our office is here to support. One of the other big focuses of my office is on issues of victims' rights. We talked about the bill regarding the child trafficking stings, but we worked on two other issues too.
Okay.
One was that victims of crime actually received their police report. Unfortunately, there were a lot of folks in the legal community that did not want to provide the report to a victim of crime. We supported that bill, and that bill was signed by the governor. So we're very proud of that. In addition,
why would they not want to give the report?
I don't know. I don't know if it was too much work. You'd have to ask them.
Sure.
You'd have to ask them what that issue was. But I believe that, criminal defendants have a right under 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment, amongst others. Also, crime victims have a right under the Arizona Bill of Rights. And I believe that if a defendant can get a police report and read what the allegations are, then certainly a crime victim should too. So we worked on that issue. The other thing we worked on is the Sex Offender Management Board, is to get more involved in how sex offenders are managed in Arizona. And so we're trying to get more involved in that because I don't believe that it's being managed appropriately. And so our office is getting involved, and we're going to be supporting some of that going forward.
Through statute?
Yep, through statute and through the actual board itself.
Okay.
And so we're supporting that board being placed under the Department of Public Safety.
Okay.
And we would ask the governor to allow my office to sit on that board so that we can appropriately manage, because we have the staff, we have the knowledge and the know-how in order to manage those particular individuals. So the number one thing I want to highlight is that public safety aspect. That was the number one issue I heard on my campaign. That was the number one issue people cared about. And our office is delivering on every single one of the promises that I made during the campaign. That's
outstanding.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I sincerely appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
This has been awesome.
Yeah.